Rebecca Thompson's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the old Paramount Theater's basement. Dust particles danced in the light, swirling like tiny stars. The air smelled of mold and forgotten memories. "This place is a gold mine," she whispered to herself, running her gloved hand over a stack of film cans. As Portland's top film restoration expert, she had explored many old theaters, but this was different. The Paramount had been closed for 50 years, sealed away with all its secrets. The beam of her flashlight caught something in the corner. Behind a fallen shelf, a large black case sat covered in decades of dust. Rebecca moved closer, her heart beating faster. The case was made of sturdy leather, its brass corners tarnished but still elegant. Her hands trembled as she opened the latches. Inside, nestled in faded red velvet, was a Bolex camera from the 1960s. But this wasn't just any camera. Rebecca had read about this model in film history books. It was the exact type used by Michael Andrews, the famous horror director who vanished in 1968. "No way," she breathed, lifting the camera carefully. It was heavier than she expected, and surprisingly well preserved. The lens was clear, the controls still moved smoothly. As she turned it over, she noticed something odd. The serial number matched the one from Andrew's missing camera. Next to the case were several film cans, their labels faded but still readable. "The Watching Dark, Scene 1. The Watching Dark, Scene 3, and so on." Rebecca's excitement grew. This was Andrew's lost film, the one he was working on when he disappeared. She pulled out her phone and called Tom Fletcher, her assistant. "Tom, you need to get down here right now. Bring the transport cases." Her voice echoed in the empty basement. "What did you find?" Tom asked, sleep still in his voice. It was barely 7 a.m. "I found Michael Andrews' camera and his lost film reels." There was a long pause. "You're kidding." "I'm holding it right now. This is the biggest find of the year." While waiting for Tom, Rebecca examined the camera more closely. Through the viewfinder, she could see the basement, but something wasn't quite right. The image seemed to shift, showing shadows that weren't there when she looked up. She blinked and checked again. Now it looked normal. Tom arrived 30 minutes later, carrying their special transport cases. He whistled when he saw the camera. "It's in perfect condition. How is that possible after 50 years?" "Someone stored it properly," Rebecca said, but she wasn't sure. The basement was damp. Everything else was deteriorating. But this camera looked almost new once they wiped away the dust. They carefully packed the camera and film reels. As Rebecca picked up the last can, a piece of paper fell out. It was a handwritten note from Michael Andrews, dated the day before he vanished. "The camera shows things that shouldn't be there. I thought I was creating a horror movie, but I'm starting to think something else is creating it through me. If anyone finds this, don't." The note ended there, the paper torn. "Dramatic guy," Tom said, trying to laugh it off. "Horror directors and their theatrics." Rebecca wasn't so sure. She had restored enough films to know when something felt wrong. And everything about this find felt wrong in ways she couldn't explain. They carried their cases up the theater's crumbling stairs. As they reached the lobby, Rebecca glanced back. For a moment, in the beam of morning sunlight cutting through the broken windows, she thought she saw a figure standing in the basement doorway. But when she looked again, nothing was there. "Let's get these back to the studio," she said quickly. "We need to see what's on those reels." As they loaded the cases into their van, neither of them noticed that the camera's film counter was slowly turning, tick by tick, even though no film was running through it. The discovery that would change everything was about to begin. And somewhere in the darkness they left behind, something was watching them leave. The restoration studio was quiet except for the soft hum of equipment. Rebecca sat at her workbench, carefully cleaning the Bolex camera under bright lights. Tom worked nearby, preparing the film reels for inspection. "These reels are strange," Tom said, holding one up to the light. "The film stock looks new, but the labels are from 1968. Rebecca frowned. That's impossible. Film degrades over time. She put down her cleaning cloth and walked over to look. The film strips were indeed pristine, showing none of the usual signs of age. As she returned to the camera, something caught her eye in the viewfinder. She looked through it again. The image showed her studio, but with different equipment, older equipment, and in the corner, a dark figure stood watching. Rebecca jerked back, then looked at the same corner with her naked eye. Nothing was there. "Tom, come look at this," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom peered through the viewfinder. His face went pale. "That's not right. That's not right at all." In the viewfinder, the figure had moved closer. Rebecca pulled the camera apart to check the mechanics. Everything looked normal, but the metal was cold to the touch, much colder than it should be. As she worked, the lights in the studio flickered. "Maybe we should call it a day," Tom suggested, glancing at the darkening windows. "It's getting late." "Just one more thing," Rebecca said. She had set up their digital scanner to check the first film reel. "Let's see what's actually on these." The scanner hummed to life. On the computer screen, black and white images appeared. The first scenes showed a normal film set from the 1960s. Then something changed. The same set appeared, but empty. Dark shapes moved in the background. The camera panned across the room, showing reflections in mirrors that shouldn't be there. "That's not how mirrors work in black and white film," Rebecca muttered. She had restored enough old movies to know the difference between special effects and something unexplainable. The next section of film showed a man, probably Michael Andrews, talking to his camera crew. But behind them, every reflective surface showed a different scene, like windows into another place. The crew didn't seem to notice. Tom stepped back from the screen. "I don't like this. These aren't special effects, are they?" Rebecca shook her head. "Not from the 60s. Not like this." The lights flickered again. On the screen, the film showed Andrews walking toward his camera, his face worried. He reached out as if to grab it, and the footage went black. A loud clatter made them both jump. The Bolex had fallen from the workbench, even though Rebecca was sure she had placed it securely. When she picked it up, the viewfinder was ice cold. Looking through it one more time, Rebecca gasped. Instead of the studio, she saw Andrews. He stood in what looked like the Paramount's basement, his face aged and tired. He mouthed words she couldn't hear. "We need help," Rebecca decided, putting the camera down with shaking hands. "This is bigger than a restoration project." Tom was already packing up his things. "I know a film historian, Daniel Morrison. He specializes in lost movies and Hollywood mysteries. Maybe he can help." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca copied the scanned footage to a hard drive. The original film reels went into their fireproof safe. The camera she locked in a separate case, wrapping it in protective cloth. Just before turning off the lights, she looked back at the case. Through a small gap in the cloth, the camera's lens seemed to gleam like an eye. Outside, the sun had set. As they walked to their cars, both Rebecca and Tom felt like they were being watched. But when they turned around, they only saw their shadows, stretched long and dark against the studio wall. Neither of them noticed that the shadows didn't move quite right, as if they were following a different set of rules, or a different reality altogether. Daniel Morrison's office at Portland State University looked like a movie museum. Old film posters covered the walls, and shelves held rows of books about cinema history. Rebecca and Tom sat across from his desk, the haunted camera in its case between them. "So you found Michael Andrews' lost camera," Daniel said, leaning forward. His gray hair and kind face made him look like a friendly teacher. "May I see it?" Rebecca opened the case carefully. The morning light from the window caught the camera's lens, making it shine. Daniel put on white gloves before lifting it. "Amazing condition," he said. Then he frowned. "It's cold." "It's always cold," Tom said, "even in warm rooms." Daniel set the camera down and opened his laptop. "Before we talk about what you've seen, let me show you something." He turned the screen toward them. "These are all the people who owned this camera before Andrews." The first photo showed a woman named Mary Roberts, a horror film director from 1952. She disappeared while filming a movie called The Dark Between, Daniel explained. They found her camera but never found her. He showed more photos. Robert Cooper, 1954. Jane Wilson, 1957. Mark Davis, 1961. All horror movie makers, all vanished while working on films. All had owned this same camera. "How is that possible?" Rebecca asked. "The serial numbers match Michael Andrews' camera." "That's the strange part," Daniel said. "The camera kept showing up at estate sales and old shops. Each time, someone would buy it, start making a horror movie, and then vanish." He pulled out an old newspaper. The headline read, "Pierce Estudios Silosized AFTR Odolianier's death." Below was a picture of Howard Pierce, a thin man with dark eyes, standing in front of his movie studio. "Pierce owned the camera first," Daniel said. "He made horror movies in the 1950s, but he was really interested in science. He wrote papers about parallel dimensions and something he called quantum photography." Tom picked up the newspaper. "What happened to him?" "Found dead in his studio." The official report said heart attack, but Daniel paused. His last notes talked about success. He said he found a way to capture images from other dimensions. He called them the spaces between spaces. Rebecca shared her phone's photos of Andrew's note and the strange film footage. Daniel watched carefully, taking notes. Pierce believed that film cameras could be modified to record other realities, he explained. He thought horror movies worked because they showed glimpses of real parallel dimensions, but he wanted to capture more than glimpses. The lights in Daniel's office flickered. The camera, still sitting on his desk, made a soft clicking sound. All three of them stared at it. "It's running," Rebecca whispered, "but there's no film in it." Daniel quickly backed away from his desk. "There's someone who might help us understand more. Linda Carter. She studies paranormal events. Most importantly, she has Pierce's research notes." "Where did she get those?" Tom asked. "She bought them at an auction after Pierce Studios closed. She's been trying to prove his theories were right." Daniel wrote down Linda's contact information. "But be careful. If Pierce really did succeed, then what?" Rebecca asked. Daniel looked at the camera, which had stopped clicking. Then he didn't just make a device that could see other dimensions. He made a door. And doors work both ways. As they packed up to leave, Rebecca noticed something in the camera's viewfinder. The office looked the same, but Howard Pierce stood in the corner, smiling and holding up a piece of paper. Even through the small viewfinder, she could read the words he had written. "The experiment continues." When she lowered the camera, the corner was empty, but the temperature in the room had dropped so much they could see their breath in the air. They had to find Linda Carter before whatever waited on the other side of Pierce's door decided to come through. The studio was dark, except for one light over Rebecca's workbench. She had stayed late, watching the strange films frame by frame. Tom sat nearby, fighting sleep as the clock passed midnight. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pointing to her computer screen. "In every scene, there's a reflection that shouldn't be there, like something's watching through every mirror, every window, every shiny surface." Tom leaned closer. In the paused frame, a mirror showed a dark room instead of the film set it should have reflected. A shape stood in that room, too blurry to make out. The haunted camera sat on the bench, its lens pointing at them. Neither Rebecca nor Tom wanted to touch it anymore, but they couldn't bring themselves to lock it away either. Suddenly, the camera's film counter started moving. Tick, tick, tick. "It's doing it again," Tom whispered. Rebecca grabbed her digital camera. "I'm going to record what happens this time." She pointed it at the Bolex, hands shaking slightly. The old camera's mechanisms whirred to life. Through Rebecca's digital viewfinder, she saw something impossible. A tall, dark figure stood behind the Bolex. It reached toward the lens with long, shadowy fingers. "Tom," Rebecca said quietly, "look at your phone's screen. Tell me if you see it too." Tom held up his phone, using its camera. His face went white. "There's someone there. But when I look without the phone," the space behind the camera was empty to their naked eyes. But through any digital screen, they could see the figure clearly now. It wore old-fashioned clothes like from the 1950s, but its edges were blurry, as if it wasn't quite solid. The studio's lights flickered wildly. All their equipment turned on at once. Computers, scanners, editing machines. On every screen, the same figure appeared, walking closer. "Don't move," a woman's voice said from the doorway. Rebecca and Tom turned to see Linda Carter standing there. She was younger than they expected, maybe in her 40s, wearing a leather jacket and carrying what looked like scientific equipment. "Daniel called me," Linda explained, moving slowly into the room. "Said you'd found Pierce's camera. I've been tracking its energy signature for years." She held up a device with blinking lights. "It's off the charts right now." The figure on the screens turned toward Linda. "That's right," she said to it. "I can see you. Pierce's quantum photography didn't just record you. It made you real enough to cross over. But not completely. Not yet." Rebecca's digital camera screen showed the figure moving closer to Linda. "What is it?" "They're watchers," Linda explained. "Beings that exist in the spaces between dimensions. Pierce found a way to capture them on film. But they learned to use his camera as a door." She pointed to the Bolex. "It's not haunted. It's a gateway." The temperature dropped. Frost formed on the windows. The figure on their screens reached for Linda's device. "Don't!" Linda shouted, but it was too late. Her equipment sparked and died. All the lights went out except for the computer screens, each showing the figure from a different angle. In the darkness, Rebecca heard the Bolex's mechanisms turning faster. Through her camera's screen, she watched in horror as the figure became clearer, more solid. Now they could see its face. It looked like Howard Pierce, but wrong somehow, like a reflection in troubled water. "It's using the camera's energy," Linda said. "Quick, cover all the screens. They can't maintain physical form without being observed through technology." Tom and Rebecca scrambled to turn off monitors and phones. But before the last screen went dark, Rebecca saw something that made her blood run cold. Behind the Pierce thing, more figures were appearing. Many more. And they were all reaching toward the camera, their gateway to our world. The entity was no longer alone, and it had been waiting a very long time for this moment. They huddled in Linda's basement office, surrounded by old books and strange equipment. The haunted camera lay sealed in a lead-lined box that Linda had prepared. Even through the thick metal, they could hear it clicking sometimes. Pierce's research notes explain everything, Linda said, spreading yellowed papers across her desk. He wasn't just making horror movies. He was trying to prove other dimensions existed. Rebecca picked up a photograph showing Pierce's original studio. Strange machines lined the walls, looking more like scientific equipment than film gear. "He started with regular cameras," Linda explained. "But then he added special lenses and mirrors. He believed that horror movies work because they accidentally captured glimpses of other dimensions. He wanted to do it on purpose." Tom pointed to a diagram in Pierce's notes. "What's this machine?" "He called it a reality lens," Linda said. "It used quantum mechanics and special crystals to bend light from other dimensions. But he needed a way to record what he saw. That's where the Bolex camera came in." Rebecca studied the diagram. "He modified it. Heavily." Linda pulled out more papers. "He lined the inside with the same crystals. Added special mirrors. But the most important part was the film itself. He treated it with chemicals that could capture quantum images." The lights flickered. They all looked at the lead box nervously. "The first tests worked better than he expected," Linda continued. "The camera didn't just record other dimensions. It created weak points between them. like holes in reality. Pierce thought he could control it, study what came through. She showed them Pierce's journal. His neat handwriting became messier with each page, more frantic. The entities noticed him watching, Linda said. They started watching back. Pierce realized they were learning to use his cameras and equipment as doorways. But by then, it was too late. Rebecca remembered the figure that looked like Pierce. They got him. Linda nodded. They pulled him into their dimension. But first, they learned how to create their own versions of him, like the one you saw. They used these copies to trick people into helping them cross over. What about the other missing directors? Tom asked. Mary Roberts, Michael Andrews. Pierce's camera kept finding new owners. The entities would wait, watching through the lens. When someone started making horror movies with it, Linda's voice trailed off. A loud click came from the lead box. The temperature dropped. They're trying harder to break through now, Linda said. They've been patient, gathering strength. Every time someone used the camera, it made the gateway a little stronger. Now they're ready. Rebecca grabbed Pierce's journal, flipping to the last pages. Her eyes went wide. Look at this, she said. Pierce wrote about trapping one of them. He found a way to catch an entity on film and contain it through continuous projection, like a prison made of light. Tom leaned forward. That's what Michael Andrews was doing. His last movie, The Watching Dark. He wasn't making a horror film. He was trying to trap them again. Linda's equipment started beeping. Frost spread across the windows. Andrews succeeded, Linda said, realization dawning on her face. That's why they took him. That's why they kept the camera working all these years. They want the film reels. Their trapped friend is still there, caught between frames. The lead box shook. Through the seams, bright light leaked out. We need to get to those reels, Rebecca said, before they do. But as they turned to leave, all the lights went out. In the darkness, they heard the box's lid creaking open. And through every screen and reflective surface in the room, dozens of figures watched, waiting for their chance to finally break through into our world. The drive back to Rebecca's studio was tense. The haunted camera, still in its lead box, sat in the trunk of Linda's car. Every traffic light they passed flickered as they drove by. Every store window showed strange shadows moving inside. The reels are in my fireproof safe, Rebecca said from the passenger seat. If we can get to them before. The car's electronics went crazy. The dashboard lights flashed, the radio turned on and off, and the engine sputtered. They're trying to stop us, Linda said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. They know what we're planning. Tom looked at his phone in the backseat. Through the screen, he could see dark figures running alongside the car, keeping pace even at 50 miles per hour. They reached the studio, but the parking lot was filled with strange mist. The building's security lights cast shadows that moved in the wrong directions. Quick, Linda said, grabbing her equipment bag. Get the reels. I'll try to hold them back. Rebecca and Tom ran for the studio door. Behind them, Linda set up strange devices that looked like small spotlights. When she turned them on, they hummed loudly, and the mist pulled back. Inside the studio, all the computers were on, each screen showing a different room from Pierce's old studio. The entities were trying to turn Rebecca's workplace into a copy of their gateway. The safe, Rebecca said, running to her office. Help me. Tom helped her work the combination lock, but their fingers were clumsy in the cold air. The temperature had dropped so much they could see their breath. The safe finally opened. Inside were the film reels from The Watching Dark. A loud crash came from the main room. Linda's voice called out, "They're breaking through." Rebecca grabbed the reels while Tom picked up the lead box with the camera. They ran back to the main room and stopped in shock. Every screen and reflective surface showed the same scene. Pierce's original studio from the 1950s. The entities moved through these images, getting closer to stepping fully into our world. Leading them was the Pierce thing, its face now a perfect copy of the real Howard Pierce. "Give us the film," it said, its voice coming from all the speakers at once. "Release our trapped one." Linda stood in front of Rebecca and Tom, holding up one of her devices like a shield. "You can't have it," she said. "Pierce was right to trap you. You want to turn our world into a gateway for your kind." The Pierce thing smiled. It was an awful smile that went too wide for a human face. "We already have." It pointed to the camera in its lead box. Every time that camera recorded, every time someone watched those horror films, they let us in a little more. Decades of fear, opening millions of tiny doors in millions of minds. The air rippled like heat waves. Through every screen, they could see more entities gathering. Some looked like Pierce. Others wore the faces of the missing directors, Mary Roberts, Michael Andrews, all of them trapped in the space between worlds. "Last chance," the Pierce thing said. "The film. Or we take you all, like the others." Rebecca looked at the film reels in her hands, then at the camera. Something clicked in her mind. "Tom," she whispered, "get ready to open the box." "What?" "But they'll." "Trust me." She turned to Linda. "You said Pierce used quantum mechanics, right? That the camera creates a field between dimensions." Linda nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. "Yes, the gateway goes both ways." "Then maybe," Rebecca said, holding up the film reels, "we can give them exactly what they want." The Pierce thing stepped closer, its form becoming more solid with each moment. It reached out with hands that were no longer quite human. But Rebecca wasn't backing down. She had figured out how to fight back. And the entities were about to learn that humans could be much scarier than anything from another dimension. "Modern technology is the key," Rebecca said, backing away from the Pierce thing. "They can only fully appear through screens and digital devices, but that's their weakness too." She reached behind her and grabbed a laptop. The entities watched through every monitor in the room as she connected it to their digital film scanner. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, still holding the lead box with the haunted camera. "Pierce used old technology, chemicals and crystals, and special film," Rebecca explained, typing quickly. "But we have something better. We can turn their gateway digital." Linda's eyes went wide. "Convert the quantum field into data." "Exactly." Rebecca pointed to the film reels. "These trapped one of them once. The same principles should work with digital storage, but better, more controlled." The Pierce thing laughed, the sound coming from every speaker at once. "Foolish, we are beyond your simple machines." But Linda was already moving, setting up her quantum detection equipment around Rebecca's workstation. "She's right," Linda said. "Digital systems are just another way of trapping and moving energy. If Pierce could do it with film." "Now, Tom," Rebecca shouted. Tom opened the lead box. The haunted camera rose into the air, surrounded by cold light. The entities surged forward through every screen. But Rebecca was ready. She had connected Linda's quantum sensors to her computer system. As the camera's energy field expanded, her program began reading and copying its pattern. "It's working," Linda said, watching her equipment's readings. "The quantum field is converting to digital code." The Pierce thing's smile faltered. Other entities tried to pull back into their screens, but something was holding them. Rebecca's fingers flew over the keyboard. Every time they used this camera, every horror movie they influenced, they left traces of themselves in our technology. Now that technology is fighting back. The computer screens flickered with strange code, numbers and symbols that somehow looked alive. The entities were being pulled toward Rebecca's system, their energy redirecting from the camera's analog gateway to her digital one. "James," she called out, "we need you now." James Miller, the computer expert she had called earlier, stepped out from the back room. He carried a heavy black case. "Quantum storage drive," he explained, connecting it to Rebecca's system. "Military grade, designed to hold massive amounts of data in a closed system." The Pierce thing hissed, "You cannot contain us. We are eternal." "Maybe," Rebecca said, "but you're still made of energy. and energy can be stored. The air filled with a high-pitched whine. The entities fought against the pull of the digital system, but they had spent too long merging themselves with human technology. Now that technology was turning against them. Linda's sensors sparked as they channeled more power. Tom helped James connect more drives. Rebecca kept typing, adjusting the program to capture every trace of quantum energy. The entities began to break apart, their forms dissolving into streams of data. The Pierce thing reached for Rebecca with hands that were now made of shifting pixels. "Stop," it cried, its voice distorting. "Release our trapped one." "Oh, we will," Rebecca said. "You'll all be together. In here." She pressed a final key. The quantum storage drives hummed loudly. Every screen in the studio flashed bright white, then went dark. The haunted camera dropped to the floor, now just an old piece of film equipment. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Linda checked her sensors. "The quantum field is gone," she said. They're in the drives." James looked at the storage system. "Contained. Isolated. They can't reach out through these." Rebecca picked up the old camera. Through its viewfinder, she saw only the normal studio. No other dimensions, no watching entities. "It worked," she whispered. "We turned their analog gateway digital." But as they began to relax, a single computer screen flickered to life. Text appeared, letter by letter. "Clever humans. But data can be copied. Files can be shared. And the internet is everywhere." Rebecca realized this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new kind of haunting. 1 week later, Rebecca sat in a secret underground facility, surrounded by servers and advanced equipment. After the entity's threat about spreading through the internet, the government had finally gotten involved. "The containment system is working," James said, showing her the monitoring screens. The quantum storage drives were now housed in a special room, completely cut off from any networks. "They can't escape into the internet if they can't connect to it." Tom walked in, carrying coffee for everyone. "The old camera and film reels are locked away too. 3 different vaults, 3 different locations." Linda looked up from her workstation. "But we're still finding traces of their influence. Every horror movie made with that camera left tiny gateways. Small, but enough to let them whisper through." Rebecca nodded. She had spent the last week building a new program, one that could detect and clean these digital fragments. "That's why we need the archive." The archive was her idea. A secure facility to store and study supernatural media. Not just the entities they had caught, but any haunted or cursed films, photographs, or recordings they could find. "The entities were right about one thing," she said. "The internet is everywhere. But that means we can use it to find others like us. People who found haunted media, who need help containing it." As if to prove her point, an alert flashed on one of their screens. Someone in Seattle had reported strange images appearing in their digital photos, images that showed impossible things. "Another gateway trying to open," Linda said, checking the readings. "But this time we're ready." Their team had grown. Besides Rebecca, Tom, Linda, and James, they had 20 more experts, scientists, computer specialists, film historians, all working to understand and contain supernatural media. "We're learning so much," James said, showing them his latest data. "These entities, they're not evil exactly. They're curious. They want to understand our world, just like we want to understand theirs. But they can't be allowed to force their way in," Linda added. "That's what Pierce discovered. That's why he trapped the first one." Rebecca walked to the main containment room's window. Inside, the quantum drives hummed quietly. Sometimes, the screens would show fragments of the entity's world, strange landscapes, impossible buildings, beams of light and shadow. "We're not just protecting our world," she said. "We're protecting theirs too. Imagine what would happen if everyone could open gateways between dimensions. The chaos it would cause in both realities." Tom joined her at the window. "So what do we do with all this? The knowledge, the technology?" We learn, Rebecca said. We study. We find ways to communicate safely. Maybe someday we can even help those trapped directors find their way home. The facility's lights dimmed briefly. On a nearby screen, words appeared. We are watching. We are waiting. We are learning. But this time, Rebecca wasn't afraid. She typed back. So are we. The entities had taught them something important. The line between technology and the supernatural was thin. Every new invention, every digital advance, created new doorways between worlds. They couldn't stop that progression, but they could guard those doorways. They could study them, understand them, and make sure both worlds stayed safe. Rebecca looked at her team, at the facility they had built, at all they had accomplished in just 1 week. This was just the beginning. Time to get back to work, she said. There are more haunted cameras out there, more cursed films, more gateways waiting to be found. As they returned to their stations, Rebecca glanced one last time at the containment room. Through the quantum drive's soft glow, she thought she saw Howard Pierce watching, but his face was different now, less menacing, more curious. Maybe, she thought, this was what he had wanted all along. Not to conquer or invade, but to build the bridge between worlds, to prove that the impossible was possible. And in a way, they had done just that. The end was really just another beginning.